Greetings and salutations, YouTube. This is DJ Radio Network, and specifically Connor, one of three, four people that are actually manning this YouTube channel. And I wanted to do more of a legitimate video this time around instead of the sort of slop and shit that we normally do on here, and review a pretty good game that I think more people should sort of look into if they get slightly bored of D&D 5e. I know that it's become the norm and everything simply because it's just available everywhere and sort of has an age advantage, but it really shouldn't preclude anybody to not try out what could potentially be a much better game. I think another offender of that, of just staying in one particular lane, is people who are into the World of Darkness but only ever played Vampire the Masquerade. So I'm going to review a game from that World of Darkness series and line of games called Mage the Ascension. So let's get into it. So Mage the Ascension is a game made by White Wolf, and it's had a pretty long history along with Vampire the Masquerade. So while Vampire the Masquerade focuses on humanity and sort of the downward spiral towards being a monster vampire, Mage is very much in the camp of being, well, it also deals with humanity, kind of like any particular game in the series, but specifically, Mage deals with things like hubris and sort of what happens when you give an average Joe pretty magnificent powers, whether or not they quote unquote deserve it. Now, Mage itself is kind of complicated. It still uses the D10 system that people are pretty much acclimated to. The main issue is that it's a lot more nebulous in how it kind of works and kind of functions. And the reason for that is because the magic in Mage of the Ascension is actually very freeform. And while that can be fun, it can also make things extremely complicated simply because it's not so cut and dry, uh, as opposed to simple things like the disciplines of vampire or the gifts of werewolf or even somewhat the cantrips you find in Changeling. So let's go into the overall idea of the game. So just like any World of Darkness game, you have this overarching plot, um, and mechanics are tied more to the narrative than they are to just themselves. Things aren't solely so mechanical that it doesn't come up in conversation or doesn't actually feed itself through the story. So mages are people that realize that reality itself is not exactly static. They realize that the world is far more weird and shapely than they think they knew. And upon this epiphany, they become mages. Now, a mage is different from a sleeper, which they might have been prior to awakening to being a mage. Sleepers are sort of akin to the word muggle in Harry Potter, if that gives any sort of parallel. But it's not really a derogatory thing. A sleeper just means that it's somebody who isn't really aware of the realm of magic like you are now. And as with Magic, it's pretty much very freeform. The only thing that tethers a mage to knowing that they can control the world beyond mundane practices is something called a paradigm. And this generally comes around and is the reason why people awaken the way that they do. So a paradigm can be pretty much anything. It can be sort of a crack in the system, a conspiracy theory that turns out to be more true than you realize, or that it's more true and valid and demonstrable than the things that we would think of as conspiracy theories today. So your paradigm kind of this is kind of an issue with Mage is that your paradigm technically has to fill the role of where you are, what faction you're a part of. Not always, but your paradigm is kind of both influenced by whatever it is you've seen and also where you're supposed to be sorted into. And this causes kind of an issue of um, it causes this issue of like what came first. Was it your own realization and then you go into some kind of faction, or were you preordained to? Basically, it's kind of like a narrative sort of nebulousness, and it can be rectified depending on your storyteller of which came first or why. But do keep in mind that the writing can't all be there. It's quite extensive, kind of like with any White Wolf game. And two, it's a game a lot about mystery and discovery. So it makes sense that there are going to be things that aren't really well explained simply because that's what the game is about. Now, I don't necessarily agree fully with that narrative choice, and that is very much exemplified in the game Mage the Awakening, which is part of the Chronicles of Darkness line of games, where everything's a lot more distinct and like there are very much real one world, one note truths. Yet it's still very nebulous because it's a game that promotes doing freeform magic and sort of personal enlightenment, but only says that there's maybe like the right way or correct way to understand the world. And it's kind of like a narrative sort of contradiction. Not so with Mage the Ascension, which came first. However, because of that, you do sacrifice story cohesion at the benefit, I mean, of having a lot more free reign. Now, no World of Darkness game would be complete without warring factions. And this game does it in spades because technically there can be like an infinite number of particular factions, groups, whatever, but there are main line examples. So, in a common game of Mage, there are you play as a mage of one of nine mystical traditions. So, a tradition refers to one of the few groups in Mage that have been around, I think, since the Dark Ages, a little bit before then, and they all have a common goal to oppose the technocracy, which is the pseudo antagonist of this game. Now, the traditions all have their own sort of perspective on how the world works. And the issue is that trying to get people to agree with that worldview is quite difficult. The traditions are not this sort of cohesive organization. They're very much disparate and fighting under one banner without much leeway for sort of differences in belief. So that can cause a whole range of issues in of themselves. Now, the reason why the traditions and technocracy have been uh, fighting, or why they are opposed to one another, is that the traditions are basically set up to be the various influences in the world of like spiritualism and religion. And people in the order of reason, which is the proto technocracy, saw that as a way to sort of put down the common man and sort of inhibit progress. So the technocracy basically came together so well and in such large numbers that the world as we know it, the modern night, we get something that is the major sort of roadblock in magic, and it is called the consensus. So, consensus or consensual reality refers to the way that the world should work by the definition of whoever has the most power, whoever is controlling a given area. So, conventional sciences that we know, um, conventional truths, things that we would consider common sense, these are all in some part of the consensus. And that's not a good thing. Um, it's I mean it's okay. It's an okay thing. But the main issue is it really puts a damper on how you do magic. So what happens is that when a mage tries to cast a spell and they're going very directly against consensual reality, you end up getting this concept called paradox. When your reality, your force of will, has to conflict with the world around you. And this can range from a simple anomaly or two to straight up death, or banishment from the literal plane of existence. Uh, I like how I'm saying that so casually, but yes, you still have to somewhat work within the confines of consensual reality. And there is a way to get around it. So, a lot of the time, modern mages will use what is known as coincidental magic. And coincidental magic, essentially what it is trying to weave magic in such a way where it seems natural to the world around you. That certain events and phenomena can be morphed in a way to where you can sort of save yourself the pain of having to, be flat by reality themselves. And like one example would be casting a fireball in front of someone's face versus causing a microwave to explode and then set something on fire collaterally. Now, even if there should be no reason or motivation for that microwave to just explode, the point is that there is some deniability and some plausibility in that event happening versus just throwing a fireball out. So that covers some parts of magic, but the main meat of magic is not necessarily in maintaining discretion and then also maintaining a philosophy. The next thing that matters when trying to do magic is that you not only have a paradigm, but that you also have a practice. And a practice is a way to rationalize your paradigm in such a way where you can do magic. So it's one thing to have a worldview, but magic is a very active thing. You cannot just wait for it to happen. Like magic can happen independent of you, But for you to do magic, you can't just sit idly by. You have to do something with it. So practices, what they will do is it tells you how you do your magic. So, for instance, a lot of well, let me try to simplify it. It's the equivalent of it's the equivalent of spellcasters in conventional RPGs. That is uh, the way that they do things, the way and method that they gain their power, how they use magic, what instruments they have to use. That would be falling under a practice. So, for example, some people may do high ritual magic, and that involves like full on sort of full metal alchemist level, inscriptions and stuff like that. Basically, very methodical practices in doing your magic. And then another mage might use bardism. So they think the power of music carries with it its own power. And these aren't exactly wrong to do. These aren't the wrong ways to go about it. But a mage will probably more naturally assume that it's sort of unrefined or try to justify a particular practice within their own purview. And then the most direct, or I guess the simplest part of magic is your instruments. So your instruments are the physical things or the events that allow you to do magic. So a practice will give further explanation into your worldview, why you should do magic. But an instrument will be the mode at which you take that rationale and you take your will and that you put it into a scenario where it works. So the way that I like to see it is that your paradigm, practice, and instrument are kind of like trying to form a sentence. And a sentence obviously needs a lot of pieces and proponents or components in order for it to make sense. You can't just randomly throw words together and expect it to have any meaning. And with Mage, things like meaning, belief, will, these are all very important to do anything in this game. So you have to make it very cohesive in what you want to do. And this is sort of the moment where you get sort of a very rough divide, sort of weeding out people in this game. Because it is a fantastic game that you can do really weird shit with. Um, but you have to put in a lot more effort than, say, what you would do in Vampire or Changeling, because it's not just about the character, it's also the way that they think, the deeper meaning inside of it. So it can be very long-winded, kind of like this video. Um, but if you put effort into it, it's pretty much rewarding in that regard. I'm trying to sort of hold off on particular plot points for two reasons. One, obviously, this is meant to be half a review, half a shill of this game because I do very much love it, despite the fact that it kind of annoys me to try to play. And two, because you'll find that many plot points in Mage change so much and often for seemingly no reason, literally in each edition. And it's it's kind of like a sort of a whiplash. So more importantly, I want to make it known. I don't know why I didn't do this before, but I have more of my experience in the 20th anniversary edition, which for any 20th anniversary game in the World of Darkness books, it's more like a compilation of um, things that have happened in the previous book with a refined sort of mechanic. It has stronger bones to it. So if you're trying to look for specific um, plot points, if you're trying to look for more depth in each of the traditions and the technocratic orders, you're not going to find it in spades in the actual core book. It is one of those games where you learn to appreciate it more the more books you have. And that can be kind of a killer because nobody really wants to have to invest so much for so many books in order to get more context, or just for things to make sense. But you kind of have to. And I'm just going to say this in the most discreet way I possibly can. I do not mind, and I would even sort of rally that you look for books in more of a PDF format. Take that as you will, because honestly, it does matter to get some of that context. I would also sort of not recommend getting so much of your information from like White Wolf wikis and stuff like that because it too is this very huge conglomerate of information where A, it's never really updated all that much, and B, even if it is updated, it still very much leans on like very old information. But with that nebulousness, it's probably one of the most sort of unfettered, unchained sort of games out there, and you can do a lot with it. And if you need any sort of proof as to like you can do a lot with Mage the Ascension, I would recommend looking at some of the art, specifically the storyteller screen art from like what is it, the revised edition of Mage, because it looks really, really stupid. But at the same time, that's kind of the point, is that things can get really goofy because, you're dealing with magic. Now, the fundamental thing about this game that I think I mentioned before is that while Vampire the Masquerade deals a lot in humanity and dealing with the sort of dwindling sense of care and compassion for the race that you once were, Mage is very much about humanity, but also things like hubris, excessive pride. Because for the most part, your mage character, at some point, one way or another, is going to think of themselves as, pretty hot shit. And they think they can solve literally every problem with magic. And that's kind of the point. Just as a vampire thinks that they are this sort of apex predator, this sort of siren, that could easily manipulate anybody, sort of like how the Sabbat think. A mage, to some degree, will think that they are either above humanity or they think they could solve far more issues. The issue is that they're right, but they kind of have to have that experience and live a little longer than like, I don't know, 5 minutes in the world of darkness who actually make a difference. So the game is more about overconfidence, and I feel like that's a thing that is very much relatable uh, for any player of any tabletop game. Is just having immense confidence that things can't go wrong, and the game allows you to play with so much fire that yes, you can literally just get banned from existence, at least for a little while, or just fucking die. And I think that's fantastic. Overall, I'd rate this game pretty highly. I actually like it a little bit more than Vampire. I get that Vampire has this sort of cultural influence, especially when it comes to LARPing and stuff like that. But for a game strictly within the realm of gaming, I think it's pretty good. Um, and I do think it is a damn shame that it doesn't get so much attention because you look at any sort of like Discord server or forum or anything about Mage, it is very barren compared to the literal official like World of Darkness or Vampire the Masquerade sort of Discords and stuff like that. And I think that's a damn shame. I think more people would like this game if they just adjusted their sort of expectation that A, it's not going to make sense because it's really not supposed to make sense all at once, and that it does take a little bit more commitment than merely making a character. And I'm not saying it's this sort of heavy philosophical, thesis statement. It's literally just thinking a little bit about power. Um, and you already get the sort of feeling of what it means to be powerful in literally any World of Darkness game, barring maybe Wraith, right? But Mage does it in a way where, well, for one, you do actual magic, and two, you're not bound by a literal phantasmal force that urges you to be a dick or to do heinous things. It's very much on you. You may have not asked to be awakened, but you clearly will reap the benefits of doing magic. And unfortunately, you become a greater enemy as you do as an ally. So I want to close off this impromptu review because obviously I'm going to do very little edits with it. I think it's a lot better for me to just kind of quote unquote ramble on to make it feel more natural about what I actually do like and dislike, as opposed to a structured video. But anyways, I'm gonna close this off with saying Mage is fucking awesome, and believe it or not, it does relate somewhat to the other books in the World of Darkness. Even the major sort of parts of Mage, like the particular realms and spaces and all of that kind of stuff, are based off of werewolves writing. There are many umbras that you can screw around with, uh, and I don't know. Personally, I think that's pretty cool because you will see a sort of reserved kind of language and writing style with the other games, but Mage really tries to pull from multiple worlds, and it doesn't do it particularly well all of the time, but it at least tries. And I feel like it's a game that really wants to unify some parts of the World of Darkness while also being like the most overpowered sort of splat, while simultaneously doing a complete 180 and going psych. Actually, you're still a stupid human and you could still die at any minute, and it's your hubris that makes you think you're pretty much invincible. So I would recommend Mage if you like Vampire the Masquerade. Mage the Ascension, by the way. I'll make sure that that's specified in the video when I edit it and post it around. Um, I might do a review of Mage the Awakening. I don't really know. I know that I'm going to do more reviews like this for the channel. So if you do like it, maybe consider subscribing and following us on Twitter. Um, Pretty much all we really want to do is do things on behalf of anyone who's interested in watching us. You know, our passions are pretty much set with what we have going on, and we just want to know what people in general think, so we can do things more often. And with that, I will say goodbye.
The velocity of time turns her voice into sugar water.